very happy to host this meeting with some of my colleagues within the SPP Scope 3 chapter. Feel free, as Olivier mentioned, to tell us in the chat where you are from. It will be very interesting to know you a bit more, whether it's the first time or not you are attending this meeting. My name is Eric Danjou. I am one of the co-chair of the SPP Scope 3 chapter. And today, with a team of volunteers, of 3 volunteers plus the embedded project team, we're going to share with you some tools, some methodologies, and some ideas that embedded project has collected. Can you move to the next slide, Stephanie, please? So the agenda today, before we go to the presentation from embedded project, first we'll go through a short introduction of SPP Scope 3 for those who do not know us. Then we'll have the core of the meeting that is about talking about how to support decarbonization of the value chain. Then we'll go through a Q&A, and you are kindly invited to share all your questions into the chats. So we will not open the mic to questions because it's a bit difficult to manage. So please share any type of questions into the chat, and Alisa will collect those questions and we'll share with the audience. And then we'll have a wrap up where we will try to collect some of the core ideas that we have shared during this meeting. But before going to the presentation, let's talk briefly about the Scope 3 chapter as part of the Sustainable Procurement Plan. So this Scope 3 chapter is a group of procurement practitioners that are specifically interested by Scope 3. So it's really a cross-industry group of people. And our ambition, even if we want to remain very humble, is to become a source of inspiration from procurement professionals. We know that on the Scope 3 agenda is pretty difficult. There are plenty of ideas here and there. There are plenty of techniques, tools, best practices. And what we want to do is to try to collect all of these informations and to become a source of inspiration for everyone in the world. Recently, we ran a survey, and the mandate that has been given to us by the respondent has been very clear, meaning to focus on 4 different types of topics. First of all, how to manage, how to set up Scope 3 targets. So we have one specific group of volunteers focusing on that. The second topic that has been requested to look at is about tools and methodologies, and the tools and methodologies teams today will share some insight with embedded projects. Then the third one is about internal engagement, and the fourth one is about external engagement, meaning a relationship with suppliers. Luciana is now going to share with you a few words about SPP and tools and methodologies. Luciana, the mic is to you.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning and afternoon. Thanks for all that attending this meeting. So our mission here in the Scope 3 group, in the scenario where, for example, as reported by CDP, purchases have trillions of dollars in buying power when requesting environmental data within their supply chains. This brings challenges to procurement professionals as a Scope 3 information, sourcing strategies, how to manage the successive tiers of suppliers, and so many others. So we wanted to bring insights on what methodologies, standards, tools, and frameworks represent to the procurement processes. Next slide, please. Which landed us in step 1, where we need to clarify the landscape of tools and methodologies available and what any relevant source of information. So that's why we have connected with the Embedding Project, which is a non-profit organization whose purpose is to help companies to embed social and environmental factors in companies using assessments, guides, and tools. And today here we are with Stephanie Bertels, the founder of the Embedding Project. Thank you, Stephanie, and she will share with us a few examples that really makes them a source of inspiration for procurement practitioners. Stephanie, thank you again. It's with you.
Thank you so much. So super excited to be here. We really think it's important to engage with procurement and supply chain professionals, because what we're seeing is that as we get more data and understand scope 3 better, that more than 11 times your carbon emissions are in your supply chain compared to your direct operations. And this figure for the last several years we've been talking about 5, and CDP has released their new global supply chain report, and we're seeing now that figure has gone up to 11. And so in most industries, your indirect emissions are going to be from your goods and services are going to be the highest proportion of your scope 3 emissions. And so that means that your job as procurement and supply chain professionals is crucially important as we think about this transition and as we think about how we're going to achieve rapid decarbonization of our economy in line with what we need. And so pressure is mounting and attention is mounting to every company getting involved in supporting credible action within their value chain around decarbonization and more broadly around sustainability. So a little bit about us. As Luciana mentioned, we're a public benefit research project. I'm based here in Vancouver, but we have teams around the world. And we help companies to embed sustainability across their operations and decision-making. And we partner with all sorts of companies across a broad range of sectors and a broad range of geographies. And we understand their needs and then help to undertake research and develop the tools that they need in order to embed sustainability. And then we turn around and share them for free with the world. And so we do work in a number of different areas, in governance, in corporate culture, in storytelling, in goal setting, in partnering for community resilience. And lately, we've been doing a lot of work in the field of procurement and supply chain. And so you'll see a number of resources that we'll be featuring today, but a number of which we've developed ourselves, but many of them are resources that we've curated that have been developed by others. And so the idea is to think of us as a one-stop shop to help you find and connect with the tools, methods, and resources that could support your work. And so our latest research, funded by Scotiabank here in Canada, their Net Zero Research Fund, is looking at supporting decarbonization in your value chain. And so we've undertaken hundreds of interviews with CPOs, procurement directors, category managers, contract managers, and also the sustainability professionals that have been supporting procurement and supply chain. And in fact, I see a few of the people that we've interviewed on the call today, which is really exciting. We've reviewed hundreds of guides and tools, and we've tried to identify leading practice and conducted interviews to try and understand that emerging practice and those lessons learned. And so we have a guidebook that's going to be coming out. I'll mention that again at the end because we'd love to have some help in making sure that that guidebook is as strong as it could be. So getting some support from this community and helping us to review that guide would be great. So what did we hear in all of those interviews? When we're talking about supporting your value chain and decarbonization and addressing scope 3, we heard a couple of themes. One is that it's really important to support procurement teams to learn more about the fundamentals of carbon science and the carbon cycle and the opportunities that creates for decarbonization within the broader value chain. We heard that it's really important to think about not just measuring, but first mapping your value chain and understanding it, and then knowing where to direct your efforts when it comes to measuring. It's really important as procurement to be able to send the right signals, both externally to suppliers, but also internally within the organization. And probably the most important thing to take away is that action on scope 3 is going to require collaboration, not just mandate or pushing this out onto suppliers. And so the last piece is about thinking about sustainable innovation and really thinking about how you're going to identify and target particular leverage points within your value chain. So as Luciana mentioned, I'm not going to be able to present every tool that we found, but I want to make sure that we're hitting some of the highlights. And so for those that are just starting out on the journey, your first port of call is making sure that you really understand the difference between scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so scope 1 emissions are those emissions that are coming directly from your company's operations. Things like emissions from production or your company vehicles or any direct combustion that is occurring at your sites. Scope 2 comes from your purchased energy, and that can include things like heat, steam, and cooling. And so everything else is, whether it's upstream or downstream, are your scope 3 emissions. Those are the things that are not within your direct control. And so those can be purchased goods and services, which, as we mentioned earlier, is a huge component of most companies' scope 3 emissions. But it also relates to things like the transportation of goods, business travel, commuting, things that you lease, land disturbance way back in your value chain, and also your outsourced freight and distribution, the customer use of your products, their maintenance, the end of life, and their financing. And so when you're trying to understand the difference, the GHG protocol is really the place where you need to start. And they have particular guidance related to scope 3. So for those of you who've already started out on this journey, you'll understand that it can get quite confusing quite quickly. And so what is my scope 1 and 2 as a supplier would be your scope 3 emissions. And what are your scope 1 and 2 emissions will become your customers' scope 3 emissions. And so there's been a lot of concern and consternation over making sure that all of the accounting on this is solid. And there are lots of tools, including the GHG protocol, that help us to sort all of that out and to figure out where the boundaries lie and who's responsible for which part. But I'd like to frame this differently. I'd like to say that what we're seeing now is that this intertwined fate, as companies are now setting their own goals to reduce scope 3 emissions, this creates amazing opportunities for collaboration, because now there is a set of aligned interests. And so now we're seeing that there is a rationale to be articulated internally into the business of why procurement and supply chain teams in collaboration with their sustainability teams would be spending company resources on helping other companies to reduce their scope 3 or to reduce their own emissions. So where do you start? And in all the conversations we had, there was a caution not to jump immediately into measuring, so starting to think about a data plan, but to first really start to understand your value chain and the life cycle of the products that your company produces and the life cycle of the products that you procure a little bit better. And so we have recently released a tip sheet for SMEs on sustainable procurement that you could be passing along to your suppliers. And in it, we undertake a very basic back of the envelope analysis to help you think through where you might be finding the biggest opportunities. And very soon, we'll also be releasing a bit more detailed guide that will really help you think about where the key emissions points might be, whether it's in the raw materials that go into the products that you're buying, whether it's in how they're made, whether it's in the distribution of them or the logistics that they're coming from far away, or whether it's in the maintenance associated with it, or in how they need to be disposed of at their end of life. And so as you are thinking about the goods that you purchase, the priorities in the past really have been, where can we get the most reliable, high quality product for the best price, and reliably and on time. Now there's an additional lens to look through and to think about, as I choose between products, is there an opportunity to choose products or services that bring with them a lower embedded footprint? So where then do you look within your processes to think about where there might be the best leverage points? And so a lot of procurement teams have been focusing on the left around electricity and heat, and they've been looking for opportunities to support suppliers into taking on more renewable energy. But we just want to make sure that you remember that there are a number of different places where you could be looking for opportunities. So when you're procuring materials related to buildings and construction, or when you're signing leases for properties, when you're thinking about the efficiency of how things are made in terms of industry, manufacturing, construction, or other fugitive emissions that might come, things like refrigerants. When you're thinking about waste along the life cycle, the logistics, the warehousing, the transportation, the distribution, and also in land-based materials. So whether that's in agriculture or in other industries that have impacts on land use, change, and forestry. And so the thing to know here is that, so this is the distribution globally on average of what we see in terms of emissions. And then our environment provides us with two wonderful different forms of sinks for these emissions. And so one is through land, through growing vegetation, and also through binding carbon in soils. And that's why soil health and deforestation are an important part of thinking about your Scope 3 journey. In addition, the oceans also have provided for millennia this ability to absorb carbon out of the atmosphere. One of the things that's important to understand here is that we're approaching a tipping point. And so we really need to be thinking about that 60% almost of emissions that are still gathering within the atmosphere and the impacts that that's going to have. So when we start thinking about measuring, what are your key tools to look to? So a few of the really crucial data standards and tools are, again, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, where they provide technical guidance for calculating Scope 3 emissions, and also the CDP, which is, again, another nonprofit organization that brings together that data. And so that's where people are both submitting their data, and also where you can go to get data. And the CDP, I'll note, has also just put together, in combination with the SME Climate Hub, a climate disclosure framework for small and medium-sized enterprises. So that's another tool that might be really useful for you when you're engaging with your own suppliers. But the message that we heard from leaders in this area is, don't wait for perfect data. You're not going to be able to get all of the data that you need. And that's where you're going to have to really start to think about identifying leverage points and hotspots so that you can get started on your journey. So that's going to mean engaging your suppliers. And there's lots of guidance and tools available out there for engaging suppliers. And so we've listed a few. We're going to be following up with a whole summary of all of these resources that we've listed for you. So, but whether it's the science-based targets or the CDP or other organizations, there's all sorts of guidance out there on how you can go about the process of engaging suppliers in this journey.
Stephanie,
and
this
as
is
you're
a great
engaging,
place, maybe to just ask a user.
Sorry?
Don't worry, carry on. I'll mute anyone that doesn't forget to.
Oh no, sorry. I'm just chiming in with a question from the chat that someone
no
had asked.
Perfect, Alyssa. Thank you.
Yes, no worries. So I think this really relates to the presentation the slide that you just showed. We had a question early on in the meeting from Roberto about how do we track the emissions? Is this a self-report provided by our suppliers? So, for those that might be less familiar with some of the resources you just flashed on the page previously, do you want to just share how essentially those are several ways to kind of collect self-reported data from your suppliers and engage with them? Is that correct?
Yes, and so they'll give you those engagement strategies, help you to get started on your journey of both reporting your own data, but also engaging with suppliers and encouraging them to report their data. And yes, all of this carbon data right now is, for the most part, self-report data. So in some cases, you might have metering on particular parts of operations or parts of the puzzle, but right now, it really is about each organization starting to inventory, determine where they might have emissions, whether that's coming from actual equipment or the actual combustion of fossil fuels, or whether it's coming from disturbance to land and soil or disturbance to vegetation. And so it is, as you can imagine, a very big project, a very daunting project for many. And so this is where there is all sorts of guidance that can help you get started on your journey. So the other piece that that we heard quite frequently from the procurement professionals that we spoke with that have already been engaged in this work is that that it's really important to send the right signals both internally and externally. So what they told us is that suppliers really need meaningful demand in order for them to justify and attract investment to get started on their decarbonization journey. And others in the business, the people that you are serving internally by helping them to access goods and services, need to know that different solutions are available. And so you play this really important point right on the boundary of the organization in helping to shape the market. And so what are the kinds of things that you can do in order to help to shape that market? One is, as a company, articulating a credible public position and goals on Scope 3. And so partnering with your sustainability group, if you have one, to try and develop a public position and goals. And the next one is around getting involved in assessing supplier maturity. And so there's a question here, how do we respond to the question of ROI, best sustainable practices? So a number of the different tools that we're presenting to you over the course of the session here have aspects of them that speak back to trying to articulate the return on investment of engaging in this work. And so in the shortest period, I think that the ROI that we're seeing really, especially from a procurement and sustainability perspective, is around the potential for business disruption. And so getting involved in helping to support the business to be able to ensure that you're working with suppliers that are themselves also engaging in this journey is very important from a business risk perspective, both in terms of the reliability of the products and services you have, but also in terms of your reputational risk as an organization to ensure that the products and services that you're creating, you're able to talk about them in a way that you're also doing your part. And so setting the expectation and supporting supplier target setting and reporting around decarbonization and more broadly around sustainability is becoming something that consumers and investors are going to be expecting of your organization. And so what we're seeing is that another way to send clear signals is to include climate expectations into your contract clauses or into your terms. Or you can consider incentives whether that be things like supplier recognition or even favorable terms on financing or contracting or payment terms. So these signals become quite important. So one of the places to start is in articulating a set of credible external positions and goals. So the Science-Based Target Initiative would be your first stop in starting to understand what it looks like to set a credible climate target. And they have recently released a bit of guidance on how companies can address Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions through their target setting. So we're now starting to see companies who have set science-based targets also get in the process of setting value chain goals. We have also included goals in our own database. So we compiled a database of credible goals and credible positions. And so this is our goals database. And what you can do is you can search for a topic. So in this case, climate. And then we have a level of influence. So you can pick value chain. And then we have all these different goals that we've compiled from companies around the world. And we've also been really transparent in the criteria that we've been using in assessing these goals based on public data. And then we also provide a link to the underlying data so that you can see the goals and how they talk about those goals in context. And so hopefully this helps you in thinking about your own goal setting. So the next tool that we wanted to highlight is a tool produced by the Chancery Lane Project, where they have come up with a whole set of potential climate clauses, whether that's a net zero standard for suppliers or renewable energy requirements or climate change due diligence or even supply chain emissions scorecards. And so these are available and have been reviewed by lawyers. Now they're situated within the UK and broadly the European legal system. But we've heard from others who've used them in the US or in other locations. And at least it's a great starting point for a conversation with your own internal legal counsel in thinking about how you might include some of this in your own contracts. And so we're also, there's the Scottish government has also got a similar tool. And so you can take a look at that one as well. The next piece that we heard that was really important is that you need to collaborate, not just mandate. So many of the emissions of your suppliers may be coming from the global south, because that's where a lot of manufacturing globally is happening. And so it's really important that you don't just set a target and impose it on your suppliers, but that you really start to get into conversation with your suppliers about what a reasonable target could be, but also identifying the barriers and helping them to develop solutions. So suppliers often want to improve on sustainability, but they need support to do it. Typically, they have less in-house climate expertise, and they face challenges in accessing the capital they need to fund their decarbonization. So what we've seen is that companies that are moving on this journey and making good progress on reducing their Scope 3 emissions, they tell us that engagement is increased when solutions are offered. So you need to think about, what could you be doing to support capacity building? What could you be doing to support financing? And how could you support networking that would connect suppliers with the tools and also with the organizations that they need? And so one of the ways that we're seeing is that because there's not only an incentive to collaborate with your suppliers, there's also now an incentive to collaborate with your peers in industry and even in cross-industry, in thinking about how you establish standards, but also how you take action. Because now your interests are aligned on Scope 3. So what does that look like? We're seeing companies who are getting involved in trying to help accelerate renewable energy adoption. So that was that first left-hand column with 30% of our emissions globally coming from our energy sources. So there are a number of different organizations that you could turn to that can help you to get started on this journey. And so as an example, we've seen Walmart created their gigaton project, and we're looking to try and take a gigaton of carbon out of the atmosphere. And one of the ways that they did that was to collaborate with Schneider Electric to launch their PPA. And the idea was to accelerate adoption of renewable energy in their supply chain. And they do this by building capacity with suppliers and also by trying to reduce some of the barriers that prevent them from sourcing renewable energy. Things like trying to bundle together different suppliers in similar regions that can come together to purchase energy. And so we've seen similar initiatives from Virgin, from Apple, and from others. And then another critical piece from a procurement and supply chain perspective is to think about decarbonizing logistics. And so that's through reducing distances traveled. You can optimize route planning. It's through the location of warehouses and distribution centers. It's by thinking about reducing the GHG intensity of the per kilometer miles traveled. And it's in fleet renewal and engine retrofits. And so again, there are a whole series of different tools put out by the Smart Freight Center, RightShip, and others that can really help you start to think about getting started on your decarbonization journey. And so then the next is around decarbonizing logistics. So what we saw were some really interesting things where groups of companies are coming together through things like the Smart Freight Center and others, but also where companies are working directly with their customers or with their suppliers. And so I thought just a really interesting and simple example is looking at Delhaize and AB InBev and how they decided to launch a beer train. And so instead of delivering their beer every day through trucks, they are bundling them into larger, slightly less frequent shipments that they're able to take by rail. And so especially given the context that we're in globally around fossil fuels and transportation, it's really important to think about how you could have conversations with suppliers and really think about mode shifting. So as we saw in that earlier diagram as well, another really important place to be looking within your value chain is back to the land. And so whether that's agricultural supply chains, whether that's in materials like wood, and also it's really important to think about soil and soil health, because soil in particular is really, really good at binding carbon. And it's also really good at keeping it there for a long time if soil is in good condition. And so soil health globally is going to be one of the most important ways that we can really think about supporting decarbonization. And so what we're seeing is a movement towards insetting. So we're seeing this both in the logistics sector and in the agricultural sectors, where companies, instead of going out to a general market to produce or to purchase offsets, they're starting to think about taking those funds and using them to support change in action, capacity building, and investment in their own value chain. And so in the case of nature-based insetting, it's around conserving and restoring and better managing ecosystems and thinking about eliminating deforestation and improving also the processing, manufacturing, and packaging of those products. So again, we're seeing some really interesting collaborations around decarbonizing agriculture. For instance, Danone has been working to support smallholder farmers and really trying to improve livelihoods and at the same time improve production through regenerative practices. And so through making these investments in their value chain, and Barry Callebaut, for instance, and Nespresso also have similar initiatives where they're really trying to both improve the lives of farmers and improve the land and the ecosystems at the same time. And so the last thing I want to point to as inspiration is to think about how you could get involved in supporting supplier innovation. And so it's really, if we keep this insetting mindset, rather than assuming that we're going to just go out and purchase carbon offsets on an open market, to think about using those funds to invest directly within your own value chain, there can be really interesting opportunities to invest or incentivize innovation. And so one of the key areas is through procurement and supply chain. You can act as a lead customer for new and innovative businesses and create space and allow suppliers to test new approaches. The other thing that you can do is you could even think about starting a supplier innovation program or collaborating with others to create an incubator. So one of the interesting ones that we came across was Tesco and the World Wildlife Fund have launched this really neat new accelerator program, which pairs startups with Tesco suppliers in order to try and fast track sustainability innovation in the food supply chain. And so it's things like companies who have remote sensing technology partnering with their fruit suppliers to try and make sure that they're minimizing how much fertilizer they're using or reducing the energy that they're having to use to grow products. And so, you know, we're also seeing from a procurement perspective, companies like Shopify who are going to become the first customer of direct air capture technology and have really made a commitment. So if you're looking for more inspiration for where it might make sense for you to get involved or where the biggest potential is for your investment, for your industry, then Project Drawdown is a great source of inspiration in terms of the science behind where the best opportunities are for us to engage in rapid decarbonization of our economy. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about where you might be able to find other resources. So if you go to our website, on our resource wheel, we have a specific spot where we curate resources related to procurement and supply chain. Some of the resources that we're producing ourselves, and also resources where we direct you to those of others. If you want to learn more about the underlying issues and you feel that you want to learn whether it's about climate change and climate mitigation or other topics like materials and waste or ecosystems, we've also curated resources related with those issues. Again, some will be ones that we've created, but most of them are going to be other resources that we think are worth your time and are a good starting point for you on your learning journey. And then finally, we're really excited to be here today because we are now working on a guide and a framework around supporting sustainable procurement. And so we're trying to create a resource guide that outlines what are the steps that you take to embed sustainability in procurement and supply chain, and how do you undertake that work? What are some examples of interesting and inspiring practice? And what are the resources and frameworks that would help you support along the way? And so we're really eager to partner with SPP provide us with some feedback on our evolving framework and also on the practices that we've outlined to make sure that it's as relevant as possible to you. And so please let us know either in the chat if you can help. John is on here and he'd be happy to hear from you. And also you can contact another member of our team, Ariel, and let us know. So I will turn it over then to Elisa.
Sure. So I definitely continue to input into the Q&A, but we did have a question coming from the slides a little bit earlier on your slide, specifically talking about engaging suppliers in insetting activities. So might be a great time while we wait for some additional questions to come in about talking about a little bit about insetting and then perhaps just a reference of the offsetting versus insetting language for those that are newer to that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about offsetting, if you need to reduce your carbon emissions and you're not able to do it directly within your own operations, then, and you still want to get to carbon neutral, then, or if you've set a goal and say you set a goal of a 60% reduction and you've only gotten to a 55% reduction, then you might need to make up the difference. And so you might be asked from a procurement perspective to go out and procure offsets. And so what you do is you go out to one of a number of different global brokers of offsets. And so there are others in the world that are making reductions or that are creating opportunities for carbon sequestration, whether that's by growing trees or by retrofitting buildings or however they're going in and creating those carbon credits. And then they sell them onto a market through a broker. And so then you can go and purchase those credits to offset the emissions that you weren't able to reduce yourself. We actually have a blog post coming out on this in a couple of days and that goes into this in detail. And so if anyone wants any more information, we can certainly send that to you. But what we've been seeing over the last year or so is that there's been a lot of investigations into the offset market. And it can be a bit of a Wild West out there. And so you need to use a lot of due diligence when you are procuring offsets because some of the offsets out there are double counting. And so they're being sold to more than one buyer. Some of the offsets out there are unfortunately just simply fraudulent. And some of the offsets that are out there can be problematic. And that's not to say that offsets are bad and they can never be a solution. We're actually seeing all sorts of really great work going on right now using the blockchain, using AI to really improve the quality of offsets. It's just a caution that if you're buying offsets on the open market, that you should really be careful about who you're sourcing them from and the quality of them in the same way that you would be careful about how you source any other service that you would procure. So as I mentioned, we have a blog post coming out that outlines what you should look for, what some of the key issues are and how to be attentive to that in the market. But the other trend that we're seeing is that companies, in an effort to try and sidestep all the issues with an open market, are really starting to think, well, what would be the cost of carbon that we would be purchasing on the offset market? And how could we take that $100,000 or in some case in big companies, millions of dollars, and could we take that and redeploy that in terms of supporting suppliers in our own value chain to reduce their emissions? And could we share with them in the credit around that? And so this is becoming a much more lively space, and I think a very, very productive development, because now you're investing in the resilience of your own supply chain. And instead of waiting for emissions to happen and then trying to take them out of the atmosphere, you're actually targeting trying to prevent those emissions in the first place. And so then that has really lasting residuals over time and really, really helps to decarbonize our economy. So that's the basic difference between offsets and insets. If people are interested in that, we'll be producing a blog post on that, both on offsets and insets that can help you out.
Great. And then a follow-up question or discussion kind of that's happening here, which is great and a very natural flow, I feel, is this question about RECs or EACs as they compare, and certainly just another mitigation methodology, I would say, is that both you as a company or your suppliers could deploy, correct? And is that fair to say, Stephanie, that every company should be kind of developing their own philosophy and hierarchy on approach, but that RECs are really just another offsite mechanism but with a very specific investment in renewable energy projects as opposed to offsets that may be more general?
Absolutely. And so one of the ways that you can pursue offsets is through renewable energy projects and things like RECs. And that targets the energy consumed aspect. But we're also seeing, I think it's important to think about your value chain and also the products that you produce. So if you're in ICT, then RECs make a ton of sense. If you're in the agricultural sector, then you'll probably want to look towards nature-based insetting and look at farming practices and soil health. It's not to say that you can't do all of those things. You certainly can. You can create a portfolio, but I think it's a particularly strong narrative when you're able to really indicate how you've been thoughtful about the leverage points within your own value chain and that you're targeting helping to support those particular leverage points.
Great point. And yeah, and for those that might not be familiar with so many acronyms, a REC is a renewable energy certificate, really specific to the generation of electricity.
And so one of the resources that I had listed there is actually a really good explainer on RECs. And so if people are interested, that slide that we had or the resources that John put in the list or the ones that we'll follow up with can direct you to learn more about RECs and PPAs and how you get involved in the renewable energy sector.
And a note for those that are furiously clicking all the links that's being provided in the chat, the Embedding project has also agreed, as someone asked, to share these resources after the fact, of course, and most of them are linked. You know, if you go to their resource wheel on their webpage, you can drill to most of these again. So fear not, there will be multiple opportunities after this call.
Well, and I would say that we're only touching the tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds and hundreds of different tools, and that's why we're really eager to create that that guidebook and to also create this interactive wheel that can support your work. And so that's why we're so eager to collaborate with SPP and with the Ambassador Network to make sure that we're providing the most useful resources that we can.
And then just another, this is kind of a fun one because I think, you know, we're talking very generally here across a lot of possible industries. And then one of the questions that we got in was nice and specific. And we have a colleague here from Brazil who's working in an agribusiness company, and their biggest expense is in fertilizers. And they're having a really specific ask here is on solutions for mitigating the carbon associated with fertilizers. So this, I think, is interesting, you know, someone that has identified already where their hotspot might be, and then kind of those next steps.
Yeah, so super exciting. I mean, I think there's a number of things that we're seeing. So I think the Tesco example of supplier innovation is a great one, where they're connecting people who have solutions to help reduce fertilizer application with suppliers, growers in their network to try and do some piloting work to really assess how they could optimize fertilizer use. Of course, we know that you know, biodiversity and mixed crop coverage and those sorts of things really support soil health and then reduce the need for fertilizer application. So we're also seeing from an insetting perspective some really interesting and exciting work partnering with suppliers to encourage them to include additional crops and growing trees among crops in order to both to help with soil health, to help with that biodiversity aspect, to diversify what they're able to produce, and then to provide more income to farmers, and then also to reduce carbon emissions and to reduce fertilizer use. So I think you're going to find that a lot of these solutions are very connected. And the really nice thing is that they often end up providing you benefits, not just around carbon, but also around biodiversity, around living standards for workers, and also around water use. So that's, I think, what's so excited about taking this insetting approach as opposed to an offsetting approach, is to really start to think about those really exciting leverage points like the one that you've identified here around fertilizer.
Great. Okay, being mindful of our time, I think we're going to move. There are some additional questions in the chat around integration of these tools and resources into ERP systems and to normal procurement ways of working, such as P2P. I think it's a great topic for a future discussion, to be honest.
I think it's an amazing topic for future discussion. Yeah.
It's something, you know, as a practitioner, and a lot of the folks in our team are thinking about, you know, on a daily basis, is great tools related to sustainability, great tools related to procurement. How do they map onto each other?
Yeah, no, Alyssa, the one thing I'll say is some of those guidebooks that I presented do address some of that. For instance, how you integrate supplier scorecards into there, how you can translate terms into milestones that can be assessed in your contract management system. So just know that you're likely not the first that's going to be trying this, and that there's actually some really good guidebooks out there to get you started.
Great. So again, a few more things coming through, very specific, great questions in the chat, but I think in order to close on time, I want to make sure that we get a chance to get the closing thoughts from both Eric on behalf of our team and Stephanie, and just make sure that everyone knows how to be connected. This chat is amazing. We are going to get the resources out to everyone, but I'm just going to let
and Eric. This is the first of many sessions, and so it's great to see what people are interested in.
Yep. Mike, are you there?
I'm here.
I think we should move to the key learnings and then close the questions.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe after you know, these key learnings, one or two more questions. Yeah. Obviously, I mean, Stephanie has pointed to collaboration and its all-encompassing concept. You know, in terms of achieving. You know, in achieving your goals, and that includes, so I'm sort of jumping around on the three, but the top three bullets are all tied together. Collaboration with suppliers, collaboration with industry peers, with competitors, obviously in a legally compliant manner. There are structures that are already in place for that in you know, in certain industry sectors, and also practices, particularly around transport and logistics, that can be done. And frankly, as Stephanie really pointed to, the need for investment in your suppliers, as potentially opposed to just simply buying carbon offsets. I think this is, in building this presentation, I mean, I think this was a key driver. And the last one is this requirement for internal alignment across your own organization. Stephanie pointed to the fact that you need to send the right signals. In order to send the right signals, whether it's to suppliers or customers or to your own organization, you need to be aligned internally, and that has to start with inspiration, leadership, and objectives from the top down. And with that, you know, you have a really good starting point to begin the journey. I mean, Stephanie, do you have anything else to add to this?
Just that I'm excited that everyone is here and is starting to think about this, or in some cases are well on their way. And I think there's a ton of opportunity for knowledge sharing in this area. And so, yeah, we're committed to helping to support that. And it's so exciting to see this community grow. So just reach out, grab your 5 nearest friends, in procurement and supply chain, encourage them to become ambassadors and keep coming to these kinds of events.
Yeah, Stephanie, I think it's a very good transition to the final message. Yes, this is definitely a call for joining, and do not hesitate to join the SPP Scope 3 if you are interested, either as an ambassador in order to participate to such a type of meetings and to listen to what experts could share with us, or as a volunteer in order to support one of the 4 groups that I've mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, or even more, because we can I think we have unlimited creativity ahead of us, so we can talk about many topics. So feel free to go on spp.earth or to connect directly with Claudia or myself. We are the two Scope 3 co-chairs, and in any case, we will connect with the community. We'll connect with Stephanie, and we'll share more and more knowledge. So I would really like to thank you, everyone who supported the preparation and the execution of this meeting, starting first with the Embedded project team, Stephanie and John. And big thank you as well to our SPP volunteers, Alisa, Mike, and Luciana, who helped me to set up this meeting. And I'm very pleased to see on the chat so many very good feedbacks and so many very good ideas. So no doubt that we have recorded all the chats, and that we have plenty of ideas for new meetings in the near future, in order to share best practices and to definitely be this source of inspiration that we want the Scope 3 chapter to be. So thanks a lot to everyone, and hope to connect or talk to you soon, and very soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric. Bye-bye, everyone. Well done to the Scope 3 chapter,
everyone.
One of the best chapters already. Well done, Eric. Well done, Claudia. Well done.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Good luck on your journeys.